Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? I believe it's a Thursday in September 17th, I think. This year's kind of gone by in a blur. At least it has for me. It's been a pretty insane 2020. Hopefully there's some optimistic news. It seems to be there's some end in sight, hopefully, for some of this mess. But one thing I do want to address right now is oftentimes we look at current events, at least I know I do, and I try to find its real agenda, what's it saying, what's going on. And it's no coincidence to me that Black Lives Matter was a very powerful thing in 2016 at the time of the last American election. And here we are in 2020, and it's back in the news every day. Racial tension, conflicts, the promotion of injustice to create outrage, which creates protests, which creates counter-protests, which eventually creates paid disturbers who go in there and stir up the protests and turn it into more of a riot and do looting and set fires. Those people none of them are protesters. You don't protest that way. I know many people who went to those last protests, and they all were outsiders. People who did the looting and the burning, and to what end, you might ask. And I saw that, I got this yesterday in the mail, and it so disturbed me. It so turned my stomach. And they like to paint the protesters as anarchists, and they need to subvert those liberal social ideologists who are trying to create powerful existence for the common man and the worker, and give him a place of power in this world, and give him his fair shake at the global environment, the global economy, because we didn't get big guns first and take the world's resources doesn't mean we don't deserve and haven't earned a part of that pie. Who owns the pie now shouldn't. They don't deserve it. They haven't earned it. Just because you killed a lot of people for it doesn't make it yours. And any movement that would rise up and try to demand more for the poor and for the middle class has to be painted with a brush that either makes the common man think they hate your nation, your race, or your religion. And it goes back throughout history how they've used those three things to turn the common man against his own interests, to vote for a group that doesn't share their interests, but the fear takes over all common sense, and so they will vote to protect what they think is their safety, and really what they're doing is making their own life more difficult. And I got this in the mail yesterday, and I just want you to see what the effects of those protests turn into riots by paid looters creates. The Democrats have moved way too far left, and that worries me. Look at the fear on her face. Look at the look that they are advertising there. That's what propaganda looks like. She's terrified. She's watching a body be dismembered. That's what that look says. Oh my God, you're taking the head off my sister. That's what that says. It doesn't, there's no far left in America. They on the other side have the radical leftists taking over Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And they got Saunders in the background, and it's just, we can't risk our children's future with Joe Biden. And I'm not a strong Democrat. I don't believe in the voting system in this country. I think it's completely a failure, and it's all lip service. But all the same, this is what propaganda is. Fear. We can't risk our children's future on a party that wants to stabilize the middle class and protect environments more so than the other party who just cares about the rich who they're backing. And I think both parties are pretty powerless to really stem the tide of economic interests. Both parties are very gated and their ability to maintain what global corporations do. A global corporation is only affected so much by the American political system putting limitations on them. They do feel the effects, but they'll manufacture elsewhere, they'll hire labor elsewhere, they'll sell their products elsewhere. The most important thing is being able to sell their merchandise here. But they'll build it in Indonesia, Malaysia, India, China, they don't care. They'll take the resources from anywhere else, destroy rivers and environments and anywhere else, they don't care. This is a small piece of the puzzle to the large multinational corporations. To the elite, to the wealthy, all they want to make sure is that this tax base doesn't get distributed in the wrong places to their interests. And this is the lengths they'll go. They will infiltrate protests that happen against great injustice that anyone with any common sense should support. The great injustice might even be staged on some level, or is certainly conflagrated and propagated and presented in ways to create outrage. And there's always been injustice. They never have to wait too long to find something. But they find the right thing, they push it all over the news, and they polarize two groups. The one goes out and protests, the other says, why are they protesting? And then the elite send paid people in to destroy those protests, turn them into riots, and turn all those people that are going, why are they protesting, into, oh my God, I hate the protesters. I hate those radical left terrorists. It's antagonists. And protests are a right. Protests are the voice of the people, more so than what a corporation wants us to do. Look at the fear on her face. I can't stomach it, because you suddenly understand why, very clearly, why they turn those liberal left gatherings and protests into burning street riots, bring the police in, just set the place on fire, and then they politicize it. And here we are 6 months later, looking at the fear of those embers. The radical left. The radical left didn't burn no buildings. The radical left didn't loot. The radical left doesn't really even exist in this country. By international standards, even a guy like Bernie Sanders is left of center, but he's not far left. But to the American economic political structure, a guy that wants to use taxation to prop up the people, that's unacceptable. Unacceptable. And so they side him with people who hate our God, hate our nation, hate our freedom. They don't even like white people. And it works. It disgusts me. Can't stand it. Honestly, it sickens me to think I live in a nation where it's that prevalent and that obvious, and yet that effective. You'd think that it was so obvious that most people would shrug it off and be like, oh, come on. But you look at the fear on her face, and when that comes in the mail, the average person out here is disconnected enough from the urban environment, poorly informed enough to think that this is how things are around the world, and has little enough a knowledge base to recognize what a radical left looks like. And this ain't it. You know, we might build a few more schools under a Democratic Party. You know, and we might obey a few more environmental regulations and feed a few more homeless people, but the degrees of movement, the degrees of the shift from left to right in America, they both barely register. And they certainly don't change the tide of global economics. Those corporations function regardless of what our minor league umpires call. We might call them out, strike three, go sit down. They're like, you are in a AAA league. You don't get to govern me. I'll just go over here, take another swing at the bat on this side of the line. It's an inconvenience, but it's enough of an inconvenience where they totally destroy the electoral process and the vagaries of democracy. They're shreds. It's a tattered, torn flag. One that we fight for and add more voters to every year, thinking that let's have the grains of sand vote. As long as I can put them in front of a television screen and tell them how to think, I think the first thing you need to do is take back the vote and give it only to those of a certain intellect. And how do you govern that? That's a tough thing. I've thought about it numerous times, and it would probably involve taking a course on democracy and economics, and without a degree in that course, you don't have the right to vote. It would have to be a course that doesn't cost. You know what I mean? It could be anyone. But you would have to really carefully regulate the curriculum in that course and have it come from a very neutral definition of economics and politics, and have the left and right go fuck themselves. Both of you go sit down. Neither of you get to write this book. This book's going to be an honest portrayal of what a country should look like, and social structures and regulation, and what regulation's there to do. The way we champion freedom and think that it's in our interests, when all it is interest for them to not have to be told what to do. It's the wool over the eyes in a form of naivete that I find inexcusable and unacceptable in our modern world. We've seen our planet from space. You know, if we can't be more unified as human people and live in such fear still, it tells you the power of the screen. How we're all staring at the Kardashians and the ultimate fighting and the National Football League and watching our British football, and we're so distracted. And we're so busy consuming and working and paying our debt and being in stress and self-medicating to cope with the ugliness of being a rat race ant. And we struggle with depression, and we don't know why, because we're living a lie. Depression isn't a failing. Depression is a recognition of success. You recognize part of you says something here isn't right. This is depressing. Damn right. You know, and we spend all our lives trying to therapy our way through and medicate our way through the voice inside us telling us something's wrong. We're not supposed to be living like this. We're spiritual beings. We're mental, social beings, and we live like worker ants. On the hill, back home. On the hill, back home. And we've got no time to light a fire, look at the stars, scratch our head and go, I wonder why. I wonder who. I wonder what my purpose is. And without that introspection, without a little bit of philosophy, we're lost. We're sheep. Luckily for you, I know a shepherd. And that leads me to my next point. It was a nice little segue, completely unintended. My good friend Sven van Voijdonk in Belgium has helped me design a couple ideas for some merchandise. This is the jazz shepherd with a little saxophone and a little clarinet. And this is obviously sheep turning into LPs. I have a Teespring site store set up. I'll put a link to it in the bottom. We have hoodies, t-shirts, tank tops, stuff for gals. It's great stuff. Sven did a great job designing those. I think they're very eye-catching, and I think they're wonderful. And you go to the store and it gets shipped right to you. I'm still ironing out a few of the kinks and the details, but I'm excited to get mine and be able to sport them in the episodes. I hope you guys like them, and it should be easy enough for you to purchase them if you want one. Thank you again, Sven. As soon as I have this hooked up a little bit more smoothly, I will send you a shirt or two as a thank you. They're fantastic graphic work. It's just great stuff. Anyway, today's episode, I want to dive into two albums. One that's fairly well known, and that's by the great Bill Evans. And he goes to Verve in 1961-ish. And this Trio 65, I think it's from 63, maybe 64. Well, it's Trio 65, so it's probably from 65. But it's a great record. It's got Chuck Israel, and Larry Bunkers on the drums. And it's a great trio session produced by Creed Taylor. There's this famous little autograph. And Evans, of all the guys that Creed Taylor brings over to Verve, is able to most maintain who he is and make records like he's always made. If you listen to Wes Montgomery when he comes over from Riverside, his course definitely changes. You listen to Cal Jader, his productions become much bigger, much less just Latin jazz, and much more coffee table, lounge, social, luau jazz. Still with obviously a lot of Latin inflections. What they call him, the king of the greatest Latin jazz player that's not Latin. If you listen to Jimmy Smith when he comes over from Blue Note, his stuff goes from being very blues-based, rooted in bebop, and just thumping, to becoming a more polished, arranged, Oliver Nelson, orchestrating things on top of it. So Verve really changes the course of what most of these musicians. Kai Winding, he's making fairly straightforward records on Columbia, and all of a sudden now he's doing interpretations of country music and surf music. So like Verve had a lot of broad strokes in how they wanted to produce this new commercialized jazz, and it's very much a precursor to CTI in a lot of ways. Big production, great sounding production. These records sound really awesome. You know, they have great bands behind them, great musicians, access to good budgets. Verve's a different entity once Creed Taylor comes over, you know, and the backing even financially, the gatefolds, it's all, he of course brings gatefolds to Impulse in 60, and he doesn't stay at Impulse very long before he moves on to Verve, and he brings the gatefold there. And until I thought about it recently, the gatefold doesn't really exist in rock and roll till what, Sgt. Pepper, Mothers Freak Out, the band, Blonde on Blonde, not Bandit Gypsies, not Basement Tapes either. But there was a number of double LPs that came out 66, 67, 68 in rock and roll that were kind of the beginnings of double LPs and gatefolds. But you got jazz doing it as early as 1960 at Impulse, 61 at Verve. In 1960, 61, Atlantic does a string of about 15 LPs in a row that are all gatefolds, and they decide that it's a little too expensive for their taste, and they go back to the single jacket cover. But Evans gets to maintain his integrity, and he's not challenged to record pop tunes or Christmas carols. Like, he gets to very much still do what he wants to do. And so that means most of his stuff remains in a trio setting, or sometimes a quartet. This to me is one of his best records of any era, really. It's a fantastic session. He sounds very sprite, very defined. I think Chuck Israels is another great bass player, and then he has a great line of bass players. Larry Bunker's fine on the drums as well. Some of the tracks on here, Around Midnight, Our Love Is Here to Stay, Elsa, Israel, How My Heart Sings, Come Rain or Come Shine. It's not that tough a record to find. Verve Records sold pretty well and had big distribution, so even if you can't find it in your local store, you should be able to go on Discogs or eBay and find a dozen copies of this. And I'm guessing the price range will go from about 25 to a very good minus up to about 60, 80 bucks for a pretty nice copy. I don't think they'll go for much more than that. There's just too many of them out there. You ask for 200 bucks for a near mint one, and most people are going to take the $65 one that's very good plus. You know what I mean? I know I would. It's 120 bucks I can spend on other records. I don't need the perfect manicure jacket and everything to be. There's too much jazz to listen to worry about my copy of 3 things. You know what I mean? If your jazz collection is only going to be 46 records, then I guess worry about having them all being pristine masterpieces. But I can get a lot from a record that's not in the best. This one's actually in pretty nice shape. The Verve records, because of the lamination and the gatefold, actually end up staying in pretty damn good condition. This has got a little condition issue here with a bit of peel on the laminate, but for the most part, she's in pretty good shape. I've had this for probably 5-6 years. I think I probably paid 20-25 bucks for it back then, and those jazz prices, as we know, they keep increasing all the time. The second record I want to cover, it's a little less famous, but it's on the Blue Note label, which means it does have a fairly good degree of recognition all the same, is by the great Lou Donaldson. And so many people dismiss Lou Donaldson as just a boogaloo player, which he certainly was, alligator boogaloo and going forward. But when he first comes to Blue Note, he's quite a fiery player, coming from the bebop school. He played with all the greats. He plays with Clifford Brown on that great Art Blakey record from Bohemia. He's a very big part of the movement. He's a senior to most of the young Blue Note cats. He's an older generation, but he really holds his own. He plays bebop and fiery tempos with the best of them. And if you're looking for one record by Lou Donaldson to really get a grasp on him as to what's one of his most edgy, most powerful, aggressive statements, it's Lou Donaldson Takes Off. It's like 1591, exactly it is. It's at the point where 57-58, when Blue Note's making string after string of just incredible records. And the lineup is so solid at the Blue Note stable at that point. No matter who you selected for a date, you're going to have some angry, aggressive young black males telling you some truth. And they drafted Donald Byrd, Curtis Fuller, and Sonny Clark. And those of you who have followed my channel for any length of time know that Sonny Clark always imparts an aggression on any session he's a part of. He seems a very politically conscious, socially motivated, racially fed up young man that wants to express his dissatisfaction with all of this through his instrument. And he seems to really have leadership on sessions that he's a part of, and pianists often do, but in a different way. He seems to bring an aggression out of his bandmates. And you wouldn't say that about Horace Silver, you wouldn't say that about most other piano players. He really imparts an emotional, mental degree of we have to be resistant. So this even puts Lou Donaldson in a state where they're making a very fast-paced, aggressive hard bop record. Fuller is simpatico with Sonny Clark. Fuller's at Blue Note from 57, 58 before he moves on to Savoy, and I think he's the perfect trombone player for the Blue Note of that era. He plays tempo well. He's not as melodic and as smooth as a Jimmy Cleveland or a James B. J.J. Johnson, sorry. But he's very aggressive and he's very articulate. So he's not as smooth and melodic, but he's very articulate and has a nice staccato, clean playing for up-tempo hard bop. Byrd is one of those guys, a bit like Mobley, where he assimilates into the setting he's in. And Byrd sounds quite aggressive on this session as well. And George Joyner and Art Taylor round out the rhythm section with listen to the clean articulation of Curtis Fuller. He's probably, for my understanding, for my current comprehension, the third greatest trombone player of this era. Of course, the swing era trombones were doing a lot different things than what the guys in the hard bop bebop era were doing. But if you take J.J. Johnson, Jimmy Cleveland, and of course Curtis Fuller, those three guys would be the lines body work of jazz trombone, late 50s, early 60s. Those three guys were the most in demand, the most skilled, and there's other great players out there, you know. And the line of the degree of how great these guys are, sometimes just as simple as how much work they got. You know, there's probably great players who only recorded a couple records because they didn't have the connections or didn't record with the right people, the right labels. So these are the three that have kind of risen to the top now and got a lot of work. Jimmy Cleveland's on everything, J.J. Johnson's everywhere, and Curtis Fuller is leading the hard bop charge. And so those are the three guys that we really have a firm sight on trombone in the early 60s. And trombone starts disappearing in the 60s. It starts becoming a very less prevalent sound in jazz. And even the great trumpet players start to dry up in the 60s. I mentioned that before in my Jazz Questions to the Cosmos. What happens to all the great young trumpet players? it becomes sax players in the 60s, almost exclusively. The young great trumpet players, they still show up, the Woody Shaws. Hubbard shows up in the late 50s, but there's most of the great trumpet players that are playing in the 60s started off in the 40s and 50s, But this is a great record. I don't want to say it's his best, because it doesn't really mean nothing. People often will say, oh, this is someone's best record. That depends on my mood. That depends on what criteria I'm judging it by. It's certainly one of his most aggressive, most up-tempo, most hard bop records. So it makes it one of my favorites if I want that. But the record he does with 3 sounds, I listen just as much, because it's a whole different experience. It's a nice, soft, driving blues. And Lou Donaldson's Blues Walk is a soulful strut into the gospel blues, which comes only 4 releases or 5 after this. It's like 1596 or 1594. So and again, the lineup of the record will dictate a lot of what you're going to get. And Sonny Clark is a real key to understanding what Blue Note am I going to get. And the further I dive into this analysis, the more I would almost surmise, if you want to know what hard bop sounds like, put on some Sonny Clark. Blakey, Silver, there's a lot of guys that are Clifford Brown, Max Roach Quintet. There's a lot of guys that are big parts of this, But if you really want to catch the emotional context of hard bop and the aggression and the strong-armed resistance against tyranny, a guy like Sonny Clark quantifies it and really gives it a face and a name. If you want to limit to one guy, he certainly impacts every record he's on. And if you want some proof of that, watch my episode on Blue Note in 1957. I document all 30 records from that year, and it's about 3 weeks ago I did it. And every record he's on is A, a masterpiece, B, widely collected and acclaimed, and aggressive and full of tension and full of this frustrated emotional context. And I don't think a lot of people have gathered the fact that the commonality between all those sessions is Sonny Clark. It took a real close look at him. They're like, oh wow, he's kind of a common thread. So anyway, the t-shirts, I'm going to try to put a link on this episode so you can start having access to them. I'm going to put some on my Facebook groups, Jazz Vinyl Club, JVC, and the Blue Note group, which also I run. So you'll be able to get the t-shirts there as well if you want. I appreciate your feedback and let me know what you think about A, this episode, B, the t-shirts. I hope you love Bill Evans and I hope you love Lou Donaldson, so you can dive into both those sessions. They're both worth collecting. Like I said, the Evans record won't be too out of your reach. The old versions of Takes Off by Lou Donaldson are going for hundreds of bucks, probably close to $1,000 for a nice old copy of that. But there's a lot of reissues of it from all over the world, from Japan to multiple American pressings of it. Takes Off is a record you should find. It'll give you a side of Lou Donaldson that won't ever make you say he's just a boogaloo player again. And part of the thing that happens, you get side-card with a hit, like Alligator Boogaloo was, like Lee Morgan's Sidewinder. You get side-card with that hit, so you get to carry it around with you and play it at all your events. And so people for the first year they listen to Lee Morgan think that Sidewinder is who Lee Morgan is. And you realize how big of a departure Sidewinder was for Lee Morgan once you know his earlier Blue Note work. And same with Lou Donaldson. Like that Boogaloo stuff that was a hit for him, it doesn't encapsulate his entire career by any means. He's one of the true greats. I think at the time he was seen as equal to most people in jazz. And sadly, to today's collector, he's lost some of that luster. And I think it's the success of his Boogaloo tracks that have made the modern day collector think, oh, he's just a shim sham, shoe shine. No, he's a cat. He's a serious brother. And I'm a huge fan of Lou Donaldson. I have been for a long time. And listen to him with Clifford Brown and Art Blakey. And listen to the thunder on that record. And then remember that that's Lou Donaldson carrying that. going tit for tat with Clifford Brown, you're done. You're good. That's a quantification right there that makes you a legend. Not anybody can just play with Clifford Brown. So anyway, that's this episode. I want to start diving into 1961 soon. I've been working on my basement, drywalling it and taping it, so I haven't had as much time to make episodes lately. I'm going to start a new jazz journal pretty soon for the Patreon group. And I actually have this idea of maybe sharing all my episodes to Patreon. And those who subscribe or pledge to Patreon, as little as $5 a month, can watch anything they want to watch without commercials. If you want to watch it on YouTube, that's fine. They're going to put commercials in it, and they're going to cut it and chop it up and edit it to do that. And I have very little say on that. It's just, once I monetize the channel and with all the music I play, they control most of what gets monetized and where that money goes and where the commercials go and what commercials are. I don't get to set none of that hardly at all. But if you like to, would you watch uninterrupted, you can pledge to my Patreon channel and watch the channel watch the episodes without commercials. I'd be curious to know from you guys how many of you would watch the episodes and be willing to pay $5 a month at Patreon to not have to see it with the commercials. And I'll still give you all the same content on YouTube for those who don't want to pay, but give me some feedback on that. It's an idea someone gave me the other day, and I'm like, well, you know, I should do that for all my episodes. There might be a number of people who would rather watch them without commercials all the time. So feedback on that, feedback on the shirts. Let me know what you think about these two records. Do you love them? Do you have them? Do you know them? And as far as the political stuff, don't give in to fear. Don't trust your eyes, don't trust your ears, trust your heart, trust what you feel. People are people everywhere. They just want their kids home safe at night. They're just like you. And all this bullshit that the media is raining down on us is meant to deceive us and to create discord and to create a status quo that will remain. Because as long as the status quo remains, the economic systems that are in place, the stealing of our tax base by corporations will remain in place, the reduction of human services will continue, the environment will continue to be destroyed, and eventually we're going to lose all of our rights as the working class. We'll be back to being peasants, working at the company store for pennies a day, 12-hour shifts, no overtime, no safety helmet, no safety glasses, no canary in the coal mine. Socialism, government, these are constructs meant to defend us and protect us. They don't infringe on your freedom. Mind blown. They infringe on the freedom of those who don't want to be regulated. They're not going to regulate your existence. They don't even need to change what we pay in taxes. They need to change where the taxes go. Enemies around the world for us to build bombs and battleships for decades. They've created terror around the world for us to keep funding these same military contractors, and they'll turn our streets into war zones to maintain those tax dollars coming into their pockets. Because the second we stop being afraid is when we start saying, you know what, we could use better schools. How about a healthcare system? How about let's take care of poor and the mentally ill? But if we're too scared, we'll never demand nothing more than, please keep me safe. Please keep me safe. Monk's shaking his head, y'all. You know, black people ain't fooled by this shit the same way. Know that. They see what's going on, and they kind of almost chuckle because white folks are so fooled by it. And they see what's coming down. Every day we're a little bit closer to living like they've always had to live. And if you don't think they chuckle a little bit at your racist flag-waving ass, helping to create a more difficult life for yourself because of your political and social naivety. So let's create a class that if you don't have this certificate, you can't vote. And if that only means 1 million people are voting, I'd rather have 1 million educated people vote who understand how this is supposed to work than having the 50 million who vote today in this country voting on, I want abortion, I don't want abortion. And I'm not saying abortion is not a serious issue, but let a woman, her family, and her doctor decide that. Shouldn't be an election for the largest empire in the world to have its outcomes hinging upon. But they use these social things to get us scared. Immigration. Mexicans are coming. The way they turned socialism and communism into something that hated God. They hate American freedom. The terrorists do. It's all a mind fuck, man. It's all a mind fuck. And now, as the poor get poorer in this country, and any degree of common sense tries to set in place, as the election cycle approaches, they ramp up that fear in the streets so that Americans don't vote for that far tyrannical left. They're radical. And the left as it is, the right as it is, are braids of the same rope. And they might nudge things a little one way or the little other if you pull on one braid more than the other. But no matter how hard you pull on that left braid, that right braid's so interwoven with it that it's going to go. And so you're going to end up being pretty much going still straight ahead. And no matter how much right we pull on the braid, that left is still so that we end up pretty much still going the same way. Internationally, economically, the one thing this current president has done more than anything else is upset some people in the global financial sector, because he's done things without regard to either braid. And I by no means condoning anything that man said or done. Everything he's done to line his own pockets and his friends' pockets. I don't think he's got a humanitarian bone in his body. He's a prototypical villain in look and how he speaks, his condescending, arrogant tone, his lack of compassion. He eats fetuses for breakfast. Like, he's not a good human being. He would fit well into every science fiction novel or film for the blood-sucking villain at the end of the film. But they always lose in the end. Love, understanding, empathy will win out once people see, once people are enlightened. And boy, people, turn off your televisions. Start trusting your own heart. It's probably too late, honestly, in America to change democracy and to redeem this system. I don't think we can get the cat back in the bag. It's greed's run amok. And the serpent always consumes its own tail. And to see this system attacking its own people and turning the streets into literally burning riots and the cycle of terror, and then to see it coming in this election posters in the mail, it all kind of comes full circle and becomes pretty clear what's governing and directing all of it. And it sickens me. It's time for real change. And I'm 48. I'm getting to the point where I'm skeptical that anything will really change in my lifetime. But hopefully my eyes will see another cycle and get to watch this humanity thing unfold. Because that's one of the great things we get to do, is witness the unfolding. You know? And that's one of the things I kind of crave, is where is this human story going? Are we going to figure it out? Are we going to become Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek? Or is the Star Wars Empire just too powerful? And my guess is, when things get bad enough, something will unify us. At some point, some switch will be flipped, and we'll recognize, you know what, we're going to destroy life on this planet if we don't wake up. And do I think it's going to be led by the American people? No. I think we'll be late to the game, and we'll come in the sixth inning, and hopefully we'll at least be able to be a closer and help make an impact and a difference then by shifting our tax dollars to something that matters. But until we see ourselves as a global humanity and have empathy for all of its people and see them all as my family and my relatives, you can't make the correct choices. You can't make informed decisions with only part of the information. And that's so much of what people's political beliefs reveal, is how big is your empathy. If you only have empathy for your race, your culture, your people, your family, it's going to limit your political economic scope. The broader your empathy becomes, the more your political spectrum will change, and that is why they discourage people being educated. Go watch some NASCAR, go watch some football, go watch your TV. Stop trying to think, trust us, we got this. And again, it's not government. Government would love for us to be more informed. Government itself functions when people are able to work together. This deadlock we have now, this isn't functioning. It's a stalemate. It's a quagmire. It's water that no one can drink because there's no current. It's just stagnant, sitting here. Status quo remaining. One day at a time, one voice at a time. We got to lift it up and speak for each other and try to cross bridges. And ultimately, that's the message of jazz. It's love. It's understanding. It's empathy for people who struggle. And the elite fear us thinking that way, because then we start to meddle in their economics. They don't want us having empathy for Africa. We're going to start infiltrating and having something to say about their meddling in the politics and economics in Africa. They don't want us having empathy for Arabs. We start liking Muslims too much, we're going to start having something to say about how the resources are being distributed over there. It's so crystal clear. And if you go back a generation, it's much easier even to read it in the headlines and see it. And then you just kind of slide that nod, recognize that today it's the same thing. Shame on us. Honestly, shame on us. And jazz is there to remind us all the time of the struggle of the oppressed and how they're going to find a voice somehow, some way. And if it means writing a coded message like the book of Revelations, warning Rome of its downfall, saying someday you're going to get yours. If it's Rage Against the Machine picking up a bullhorn and saying killing in the name of. Or if it's Louis Armstrong picking up a trumpet and playing with such a boisterous amount of love and forgiveness that he snaps the chains around the necks of his people and opens the hearts of those who oppress them. Art has a powerful ability to take my people into the promised land. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Can only be written by someone who has nothing. It's not being thankful for everything we have, because those people never take the time to be thankful. It's those who have nothing who say, you know what, I don't need nothing. I have joy and love and family and peace and love. And that's where we need to be. You know, until we can recognize the difference between what I need and what I want, we'll never be happy in this culture. I said that before. I say it to my kids all the time. Know what you need. Family, promises, trust, love, food, water, air. These are the things you need. The things you want, figure out a few that you really want and need them. But everything else, don't need it. And when you stop needing, that's when happiness can start. Because as long as I'm sitting around needing things, I can't be happy. And the consumer never wants us to be happy. It wants us to keep consuming, trying to buy that next piece of happiness. When we put that shit aside and recognize, you know what, happiness is me sitting here listening to Lou Donaldson telling me about his experience, making me appreciate how much the Lord has shepherded me. Y'all be safe. Check out those Jazz Shepherd shirts. Sven, big thank you to you again, my brother. Y'all be safe. Peace.